deafening roar. I'm Leela, and this is my story of a near-perfect life that almost became a living nightmare. You see, I met Daniel, the love of my life, back in college during a history lecture. He was charming, intelligent, and incredibly considerate. We dated, fell deeply in love, and got married in an almost unrealistically beautiful ceremony. Imagine white lilies, hundreds of flickering candles, and the most incredible gown I'd ever seen, let alone worn. It was nothing short of a fairy tale, and I was living it. So, Layla, how does it feel to snag a wealthy guy like my brother? She had asked during our engagement party, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I had laughed it off then, not wanting to create a scene. It's not about wealth, Karen. It's about love, something you'd understand if you ever took the time to truly care about someone else. She'd narrowed her eyes, the fake smile never leaving her face, but I could tell she wasn't pleased with my response. At our wedding, she gave a toast that was equally passive, aggressive. To Lila and Daniel, may your marriage be as fascinating as the speed with which it happened. Cheers. Even Daniel had noticed. She's always been competitive, Leela, especially with me, but I never thought she'd go this far to make you feel unwelcome. He'd told me after the wedding, looking genuinely upset. I don't know what her problem is, Daniel. I've tried to be nice, but it's like she's out to get me. I had confided in him, my heart heavy with the only blemish on my otherwise perfect day. The friction with Karen had been the only flaw in an otherwise seamless tapestry of my life. With Daniel, the love we shared was rock, solid, but I always felt Karen lurking in the background, a gray cloud threatening to rain on our parade. Daniel and I were genuinely happy, and it seemed like she couldn't stand that. I often found myself wondering what it was that made her so resentful. Was she jealous of her brother, of me, or of the life we were building together? Karen's always been a complicated person, Leela, Daniel would say whenever I voiced my concerns. But we can't let her affect our happiness. We won't. And so we carried on, enveloped in our love, hoping that the Karen-sized cloud on our horizon would just go away on its own. But, as I'd soon find out, some storms don't pass. You have to weather them. Thus, our lives were almost picture. Perfect, but that almost carried a lot more weight than I'd ever suspected it could. Little did I know, the real challenge was yet to come. A challenge that would test not just my patience, but the very fabric of our marriage. That was my life. A beautiful fairy tale with just one jarring note, a single dissonant chord. And as Daniel and I stepped into the next phase of our lives, the dissonance was about to become a deafening roar. So here I am, flipping through my wedding album, the joy of those memories tinged with a sense of foreboding. As beautiful as the past was, the future was about to get ugly. But at that moment, all I could do was bask in the happiness of my almost perfect life, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. After years of hard work, sleepless nights, and enduring an endless cycle of challenges and victories, Daniel and I found ourselves in a place we had only ever dreamed of. The engineering firm that Daniel had started right out of college had blossomed into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. As for me, I had carved out a successful career as a dietitian, building a loyal client base that spanned across multiple states. We were young, ambitious, and at the pinnacle of our professional lives. That's when we decided to make a grand purchase, one that would mark the zenith of our achievements thus far, a luxurious villa that cost a staggering $1 million. Are we really doing this, Leela? Daniel asked as we sat on our couch, scrolling through the online listing of the villa one more time. The pictures showcased sprawling gardens, a picturesque swimming pool, and a mansion that looked like it belonged in a movie. We've earned it, Daniel, I said, looking at him with excitement. Besides, this could be our forever home, a place where we could start a family. He looked at me, his eyes sparkling. I've always wanted to give you the life you deserve, Layla. This feels like the first big step in doing that. And so, after endless paperwork, phone calls, and meticulous planning, the villa was ours. We hosted a little housewarming ceremony, inviting only our closest friends and family. Well, almost all our family. Karen was conspicuously absent, citing a work commitment that conveniently clashed with our celebration. When we finally moved in, it felt surreal. Each room was more magnificent than the last, with intricate details that showcased the architect's ingenuity and aesthetic sense. My favorite was the kitchen, spacious and equipped with every modern amenity you could think of. Daniel was drawn to the study, which had a grand bookshelf and an awe-inspiring view of the garden. I could spend hours here, he said, admiring the room. This is the perfect environment for innovation and creation. Likewise, I added that kitchen is every cook's dream. It's like it was designed with me in mind. We should christen the place, Daniel suggested, a twinkle in his eye. How about a candlelight dinner tomorrow evening? Just the two of us, I asked, intrigued. Just the two of us, he confirmed, planting a soft kiss on my lips. For a few days, we were living in our million-dollar dream, enjoying the kind of serenity and happiness that we thought only existed in fairy tales. However, amidst this domestic bliss, a phone call came. Karen had lost her job. She was struggling and she needed help. Leela, it's my sister. She's going through a tough time, Daniel began, a seriousness overtaking his usually cheerful demeanor. Would you mind if she stays with us for a while, just until she gets back on her feet? I hesitated. A voice inside me screamed, warning that this could be the breaking point. But then I looked into Daniel's eyes, full of genuine concern for his sister, and my resistance melted away. Of course, she can stay, I finally said, ignoring the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. She's family, after all. Little did I know, inviting Karen into our home was like inviting a hurricane into a sanctuary. Our million-dollar dream was about to be disrupted, and the rifts that had always existed would soon become gaping canyons. The house, a symbol of our achievements and love, was now a ticking time bomb, and the fuse had just been lit. Within days of that fateful conversation, Karen arrived at our villa with an avalanche of luggage and an even heavier cloud of negativity. At first, she played the part of the grateful sister, thanking us profusely for letting her stay and promising it would only be temporary. Layla, you have no idea how much this means to me, Karen cooed, her eyes darting around the opulent living room. This place is incredible. You guys have really hit the jackpot, haven't you? We've been fortunate, I replied cautiously, already sensing the bitterness that laced her words. And we're glad to help you out, Karen. Family supports family. Daniel, ever the doting brother, showed her to the guest suite, a room more luxurious than most five-star hotel accommodations. I hope you'll be comfortable here, he said, setting down her bags. Comfortable? This is heavenly, Karen exclaimed. I can't believe you guys live like this every day. I'm going to feel like a princess. And feel like a princess she did, but she acted more like a tyrant. The initial facade of gratitude wore off quickly. Within a week, her true colors started showing. If you've ever lived with someone whose sole aim is to make your life miserable, then you'll understand the hell that became my daily existence. For instance, every morning I would make breakfast for Daniel and myself, a simple yet loving routine that we both cherished. The first morning Karen was here, she sauntered into the kitchen and snorted, "Oh, we're having scrambled eggs again. Don't you know any other recipes?" The next day, I decided to make pancakes, partly to switch things up and partly to avoid another snide comment. Pancakes, she sighed dramatically as she entered the kitchen. I guess some people just don't care about eating healthily. I looked at her, incredulous. You don't have to eat it if you don't want to, Karen. She smirked. Oh, I'll eat it. I wouldn't want your efforts to go to waste. Despite the overt hostility, I tried to maintain my composure for the sake of Daniel. He was clearly uncomfortable with the tension but didn't know how to address it. Just give her some time, he'd say, his voice tinged with a desperation I'd never heard before. She's going through a rough patch. But things only escalated. Karen began treating me like a live, in servant rather than family. She'd leave her room in a state of utter chaos, expecting me to clean up after her. She'd use the last of the milk, the last of the shampoo, and even the last of the laundry detergent without ever replacing them or even mentioning it. Layla, where's the detergent? I have laundry to do. She would demand as though it were my responsibility to cater to her every need. Last I checked, it was in the laundry room. If it's finished, there's a grocery store 2 blocks away, I'd respond, my patience fraying more with each passing day. When Daniel was around, she'd morph into a completely different person. Sweet, demure, and considerate. It was like living with Dr. Jekyll and Mies. Hyde. I found myself anxiously waiting for Daniel to come home each day, as that was the only time Karen reined in her venom. I knew something had to give. This wasn't sustainable, and it certainly wasn't healthy for me or my marriage. What I didn't know was how catastrophically things would come to a head. I was a boiling pot of water, and Karen was the flame. Constantly high, never wavering, pushing me towards an inevitable eruption. And erupt I did, but not before things got so bad that I couldn't see a way out. The house that was once a haven had become a battlefield, and the enemy was living right under our roof. The walls of our $1 million dream were closing in, becoming a $1 million nightmare, and I was its captive. 2 months into Karen's unwelcome stay, the tension had escalated into a volatile mix of resentment and outright hostility. I tried my best to keep the peace, hoping that Karen would find a new job and move out, but my optimism was waning. And then, one day, she crossed an unforgivable line. I was in the laundry room folding clothes and trying to find a moment of peace amid the chaos. Karen walked in, carrying a heap of dirty laundry, and without a word, she dumped it onto the already sorted piles. "Leela, could you wash these for me?" she said, feigning sweetness. I looked at her, then at the laundry. A mix of frustration and disbelief washed over me. "Karen, I'm not your maid. You can wash your own clothes." That's when it happened. Her face turned crimson, eyes flashing with unchecked rage. Before I could react, her hand swung through the air, striking my cheek with a force that left me stunned. Then she hit me again. "You ungrateful wretch," she spat. "My brother gives you everything and you can't even wash some clothes for me?" I stood there, hand on my stinging cheek, shocked into silence. This was a new low, even for Karen. For a split second, the room went blurry as tears of humiliation filled my eyes. But then something in me snapped. The boiling pot had finally overflowed. "Get out!" I hissed, my voice low and trembling. "Get out of this room, and if you ever lay a hand on me again, you'll regret it." She sneered. "Or what? You'll tell my brother. He'll never believe you." "We'll see about that." Shaking, I picked up my phone and made a few quick calls. My childhood friend, Lisa, was now a well-respected lawyer, and her husband, Mark, was a police officer. I'd always avoided pulling strings, but this was an emergency. Within an hour, Lisa, Mark, and a couple of their colleagues arrived at our villa. "What's going on, Layla?" Lisa asked, concern etched on her face as she took in my reddened cheek. Before I could answer, the police officers began taking photographs. Evidence Mark explained, his eyes full of a fury that mirrored my own. Karen sauntered into the room, her face going pale at the sight before her. "What is this? What are you trying to pull, Leela?" Lisa stepped forward. "I think the question is, what are you trying to pull, Karen? Assault is a criminal offense. You could go to jail for this." Suddenly, the door swung open, and Daniel walked in, his face a mask of confusion and shock. What on earth is happening here? I met his eyes, my own filled with a blend of pain and defiance. "Your sister assaulted me, Daniel. I've had enough. It's her or me. Make a choice." Karen lunged at Daniel, screaming. "She's lying. You're going to believe her over your own sister?" Daniel looked at Karen, then at me, and finally at the police officers documenting my injuries. He sighed a gut-wrenching sound filled with the weight of his decision. "Karen, you need to leave." Her face crumpled, but she said nothing as she stormed out of the room, hastily packing her things and leaving the house in tears. Daniel turned to me, his eyes filled with a sadness I'd never seen before. "I'm so sorry, Leela," he said softly. "I should have done something sooner." And just like that, the storm was over. At least for now. The villain had been ousted, but at what cost? The damage was done. My sanctuary had been violated, my trust shattered. Could we ever go back to the way things were? I wasn't so sure. As I stood there amid the ruins of my broken peace, I realized that $1 million villa meant nothing if the home within its walls was a war zone. And I knew that the real battle, the one for the soul of my marriage, was only just beginning. In the days that followed Karen's dramatic exit, the villa felt like a different place. Quieter, certainly, but also heavy with the unspoken truths that lingered in the air. Daniel and I moved through our routines like ghosts, tiptoeing around the gaping wound in our relationship, until finally, one evening, he broke the silence. "Leela, we need to talk," he said, his voice tinged with a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. We sat on the plush couch in our living room, the same couch where we'd dreamed countless dreams together, but now it felt like a battleground. Daniel took a deep breath and began. "I can't apologize enough for what Karen did and for my part in letting her behavior go unchallenged," he said. "I failed you, and for that, I'm truly sorry." "Daniel, your sister physically assaulted me," I replied, my voice rising despite my attempts to keep it steady. "It's not just about failing me. She broke the law. If I didn't have connections, what would have happened? Would you still have chosen me over her?" The question hung in the air, a palpable force that threatened to widen the growing rift between us. Daniel looked at me, his eyes filled with pain and regret. I wish I could answer that with certainty, but the truth is, I don't know. I failed not just as a husband, but also as a human being. I chose to be blind because facing it was too uncomfortable. But that's no excuse. As he spoke, my heart battled itself, part of it wanting to forgive him and move on, the other part hardened by betrayal and hurt. I loved Daniel, but love was no longer the only variable in this complex equation. Trust had been compromised, and that was not so easily repaired. "My friend Lisa's firm is drawing up a restraining order against Karen," I finally said, breaking the silence that had settled between us. I never thought I'd have to take legal action against family, but here we are. Daniel nodded, his eyes misty but resolute. "I support that decision. It's important for you to feel safe and for us to establish boundaries." "And what about us, Daniel? Where do we go from here? How do I know you'll choose me when it really matters?" He reached for my hand, holding it as if it were a fragile bird. "All I can give you is my word, Leela. I will do everything in my power to make this right, to earn back your trust. I know words are cheap, but it's all I have right now." His promise, sincere as it was, couldn't instantly mend what was broken. But it was a start, a small but significant step toward reclaiming the love and trust we'd lost. However, actions speak louder than words, and Daniel knew he had a long road ahead to make amends. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Lisa. "The restraining order is ready. We'll be filing it first thing tomorrow." I looked up at Daniel, my eyes meeting his in a silent agreement that, while a journey ahead was uncertain, it was one we were willing to take. Together, but not without scars. And certainly not without the hard-earned wisdom that sometimes love alone isn't enough. It has to be backed by action, by choices that honor not just the vows you've spoken, but the person you've promised them to. As I sat there in the million-dollar home that had seen both the best and worst days of my life, I realized that the day of reckoning had arrived, not just for Karen, but for me and Daniel as well. And the choices we made now would define not just our relationship, but who we were as individuals. So, while the legal papers would keep Karen at a distance, the real work lay ahead of us, in the emotional and moral debts that needed settling. And as daunting as it was for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps we could rebuild what had been shattered. Only time would tell. Months had passed since Karen's expulsion from our lives, and the restraining order served its purpose well. She maintained her distance, physically at least. Emotionally, the scars were still healing. Not just for me, but for Daniel as well. Our villa, once a symbol of our dream life, had been tainted, but we were in the process of reclaiming it, room by room, memory by memory. One day, as we sat in the renovated living room, new paint, new furniture, as if a facelift could erase the past, Daniel looked up from his book and spoke. "Leela, have you ever thought about renewing our vows?" he asked cautiously, as if testing the waters. The question caught me off guard. Renewing our vows? You think a ceremony will magically make everything okay? He sighed, setting his book aside. "No, I don't think a ceremony is a cure-all, but I do think it could be a meaningful step, a way for us to consciously choose each other again, especially after all we've been through." His eyes searched mine for a reaction, for any sign that his suggestion had merit. I pondered the idea, the layers behind it, and what it meant for both of us. Could we recapture the magic of our early years? Did we even want to? "I don't know, Daniel," I finally said. "It's not about the vows we say. It's about the actions we take. Can we live those vows every single day? Because that's what's going to make or break us." He nodded, understanding etched on his face. "You're right. But I want to take that challenge, Leela. I want to work every day to be the husband you deserve." His earnestness touched a chord, and I found myself wanting to believe in us, in our ability to heal and grow. Okay, let's do it. But remember, it's not a new beginning. It's a continuation, a commitment to work through the good and the bad. We both knew that renewing our vows wouldn't solve our problems or wipe the slate clean, but it would give us a moment to pause and reflect, to openly acknowledge the challenges we'd faced and the hurdles still ahead. It was a promise to keep trying, to keep fighting for the life and love we'd envisioned in this very home. Weeks later, we stood in our backyard, under an arch of white roses, facing each other as we had years before. The words we spoke were not new, but they felt different. Weighted by the trials we'd endured, yet uplifted by our hope for the future. "I do," I said, looking into Daniel's eyes, seeing the man he was and the man he was striving to become. "And I do," he echoed, his voice strong, unwavering. As our lips met, sealing our vows, I thought about how far we'd come. From the dreamlike euphoria of our early years to the stark reality of our darkest days, we traversed an emotional landscape more varied and challenging than either of us had anticipated. Yet here we were, still standing, still choosing each other. The work was far from over. Love, I'd learned, was not a fairy tale but an ongoing narrative, filled with twists and turns, heroes and villains, and choices that could alter the plot at any moment. And as we stepped into this next chapter, hand in hand, I was reminded that while a $1 million villa might offer a backdrop for our story, the real substance, the love, trust, and ongoing commitment